Plus millennials.
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 These millennials are lazy.
And they're lazy.
Lazy and entitled.
Buying avocados instead of houses.
Smashed avocado on toast.
On avocado toast.
Millennials. Snowflakes.
The laziness.
They're lazy, they're narcissistic.
Too lazy for cereal.
Narcissistic.
Narcissists.
Lazy, entitled.
Avocado toast.
Avocado toast.
Precious snowflakes.
Snowflake.
The snowflakes.
Snowflake.
The snowflake.
A snowflake.
Millennial complaining syndrome. Self-absorbed. Self-absorbed.
Distracted. They get distracted.
Entitled.
Lazy, entitled, millennials.
Entitled.
Entitlement.
Entitlement.
Entitled.
Hi, I'm Dylan, and this is Not Exactly Normal. In case you couldn't tell, I'm a millennial, and every day I find myself increasingly frustrated for two opposite reasons. One, millennials being the worst, and two, hearing about how millennials are the worst in news segments like this.
Lastly this morning, a note to millennials, I guess, with housing prices going up and a lot of folks wanting to buy their first house, a word of warning, stop spending on frivolous things, maybe.
Millennials say housing prices are going up too fast. Housing prices are going up too fast. And this multimillionaire came out and said, you know, my parents, they bought their home and they saved a lot of money and they did it, but they saved a lot of money, they sacrificed. Millennials now are doing, smashed avocado on toast for 19 bucks on top of, $4, $5 cups of coffee. They have to go to Europe.
While I think that point, and reporting in general about millennials, is laughably inaccurate, I am torn about how I feel about my generation. On one hand, I see ridiculous reports like that and think, no, millennials buying avocado toast isn't why we can't afford the average home price of $1 million. Please do your job better. But then, someone my age will do something annoying, like saying they don't eat burgers. And I'll think, we really are a terrible generation. So I ping-pong around in my head about how I feel about the situation, especially when it comes to determining if my anecdotal evidence and these biased news stories are a good representation of the millennial population as a whole. For example, I'll see articles citing polls that have found millennials don't drink or do drugs, which is lame, but then I have a lot of friends who don't drink or do drugs. I'll then read articles saying that millennials don't eat gluten. And then at my office, it took an hour for a group of millennials to settle on a pizza order due to dietary restrictions. And even then, about half of them went out to get salads. Ugh. Does this mean that us millennials are actually like how we're represented in the news? Who knows? Either way, that same group of millennials will often complain to me about being disparaged in the media. Being called lazy and entitled in the news on a daily basis is a reality for our generation. But it's not just the news. This rhetoric of millennials being the worst comes up in the workplace, social settings, and family dinners. But what really gets me is that same group of people that will complain about being called oversensitive, entitled, and lazy in the news will complain to me about kids these days. Just the other night, my friend Anneli was complaining to me that kids these days don't ever go outside and they spend all their time on iPads. What I've come to see is that people, including myself, don't hate millennials. People hate young people. And it turns out that blaming young people for the failings of the old is a very human phenomenon and dates at least as far back as we started writing these complaints down. Let's rewind 2,400 years. The Romans build their first aqueduct, the Chinese invent the world's first handheld crossbow, and the Greeks invent the donkey-powered mill. Yet despite none of these inventions being iPads, the old still found something to complain about in the young. And it's something that we hear a lot of today.
And even among my son's friends, you'll see that sense of entitlement. They went to a great school, they really think they know everything.
I certainly know a lot of people like this, but so did Aristotle. In the 4th century BC, he wrote, "To begin with the youthful type of character. They think they know everything, and they are always quite sure of it." Another complaint that you'll hear is that social media and technology are ruining millennials' brains, and they're akin to drug and alcohol addiction.
We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive, right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, And we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down.
Yet, when novels started to become very popular in the 18th century, people reacted very similarly. On March 21st, 1862, a reverend by the name of Henry Shrimpton, much like Simon Sinek, gave a lecture in which he spoke of the dangers of novels. The Shepton Mallet Journal reported the event, saying, "There was the reading mania. It was of the highest importance to educate and inform the mind, but he feared that there was a general tendency to peruse works which were anything but profitable. While he held that novel reading was not injurious if the novels read enforced moral truth, nevertheless he thought the low fictitious literature circulated so largely through the country in the shape of the weekly journal was doing a most serious harm to the moral feeling of the people. The almost invariable result of such publications was to vitiate the taste and corrupt the heart by their descriptions of vice in its worst forms." Another criticism that I hear all the time is that millennials are always looking at their smartphones and thus are always too busy, distracted, and their social skills have gone by the wayside.
Research shows so-called distracted walking, especially from handheld devices like cell phones, is a growing problem. The number of ER visits for related injuries, most often due to falling, doubled between 2005 and 2010 to more than 1,500, with millennials ages 21 to 25 the most likely to get hurt.
How many things can you now do where you can get millennials to spend 15 minutes paying attention, not being distracted?
Professor Kenneth Goldsmith says the goal is to have students produce a strong story at the end of the semester. He hopes the course will prove that the internet and digital distraction is actually making society...
No, but actually, it's not, Professor. Let me help you out. It's actually rewiring...
the brain?
It's rewiring millennials' brain. They get distracted every 11, 12, 13 seconds.
Yet, on April 1st, 1913, the Evening Telegraph and Post published the following. "In this lightning express age, in these strenuous times, when everybody has the mania to attend wealth and position, we no longer have the time to reflect with deliberation and to develop our powers of conversation. In these newspaper and periodical days, when everybody can get the news and information which does cost much to collect, almost everybody sits behind the morning sheet or is buried in a book or magazine. There is no longer the same need of communicating thought by the spoken word as there was formerly." Another complaint that you've definitely heard is that we're lazy, in both body and mind.
Plus, millennials, often portrayed by the media as being lazy.
They have huge egos, they have no experience, and they're lazy.
But often these millennials are lazy, they have a lack of drive, and that's why they're living in their parents' basements.
I do have a problem with the laziness.
Millennials, they're lazy, they're narcissistic.
It says
it's laziness.
Are millennials too lazy for cereal?
I hear a lot of adults, they complain about millennials. They complain how lazy they are, right?
A millennial laziness, as they put it.
And millennials, very lazy. I hate to say that, but they're slothful.
Millennial reboot, stereotyped as lazy and entitled.
What do you think, though? Is it millennial laziness, or is he just that exhausted?
On December 26, 1951, the Falkirk Herald in Scotland published an article complaining that the youth of the day weren't walking the town's historic trails and were instead opting for the bus. Quote, "Many young people were so pampered nowadays that they had forgotten there was such a thing as walking, and they made automatically for the buses. Unless they did something, the future for walking was very poor indeed." Side note, why did they put in a bus route if they were only going to get mad at people for using it? Similarly, in 1330, Yoshia Kenko wrote the Essays of Idleness, reading, "Surviving scraps from the past reveal how superb the phrasing used to be. The ordinary spoken language has also steadily coarsened. People used to say, raise the carriage shafts or trim the lamp wick, but people today say, raise it or trim it." Millennials are also said to think way too highly of themselves and have YouTube channels where they beg for people to subscribe to their channel. It's a bad joke.
Millennials, they have an image problem.
Millennials are narcissists.
They are officially the most narcissistic generation.
And the millennials are narcissists, lazy, entitled, and narcissistic.
Yet in 1771, Town and Country magazine published the following letter. "Whither are the manly vigor and athletic appearance of our forefathers flown? Can these be their legitimate heirs? Surely no, a race of effeminate, self-admiring, emaciated fribbles could never have descended in a direct line from the heroes of Poitiers and Agincourt." Piers Morgan wrote a piece for the Daily Mail that sums up a lot of the millennial complaints pretty well. The tragic truth is that America's millennials are a bunch of phone-addicted, selfie-obsessed, hashtagging, Snapchatting, kale-munching, twerking, lazy, whining, ill-informed, politically correct, cosseted narcissists who find absolutely everything mortally offensive and believe there are 165 ways to sexually identify. And while he may be right, it's not exactly a comment on millennials. Almost 100 years ago, the same publication, the Daily Mail, put out a similar piece titled The Conduct of Young People, and it reads, "It is true that at the present time, the world of politics, economics, society, intellectual pursuits, and religion are all in a state of ferment. But why this should be made an excuse for bad manners, indiscipline, defiance of accepted standards of conduct, and the 101 things to be seen and deplored in the young life of the nation, instead of being recognized as some part due to the latter, is beyond the average observer. We defy anyone who goes about with his eyes open to deny that there is, as never before, an attitude on the part of young folk which is best described as grossly thoughtless, rude, and utterly selfish. The craze for pleasure has developed into a mad scramble to be amused, often in an entirely illegitimate way. It may seem magnificently modern for a young girl to address her father as Old Bean and her father as Old Thing, but it is tragically indicative of the drift away from rectitude which has become painfully apparent in the young life of the nation. There is an art of living, and young people who are apt to get bored or fed up, as they put it, need to study it. Millennials are also said to be terrible with money.
A new report shows just how bad millennials are with their money. Just letting Wilf know here that millennials are eating avocado toast instead of buying housing.
Millennials buying avocados instead of houses. Avocado pricing has gone up.
But yeah, the millennials are supposed to be spending all their money on avocado toast and $6 coffee.
Well, a mortgage company is running a unique promotion trying to get millennials to buy a home. They're using avocado toast.
Do millennials waste money? Maybe. Is this a unique criticism to millennials? No. In the 1st century BC, Horace wrote, "The beardless youth does not foresee what is useful, squandering its money," presumably on avocados. Part of the reason we're so bad with money is because we're cautious little snowflakes.
Another day, another college doing something ridiculous in the name of our precious millennial snowflakes.
We're treating these adolescents and these millennials like precious snowflakes.
A millennial snowflake test.
Usually millennials as snowflakes.
Of millennials just being, ridiculous snowflakes.
And don't you dare call a millennial a snowflake.
74% of millennials think being called a snowflake damages their mental health.
But we're also entitled.
That millennials act entitled.
God, millennials so entitled.
Lazy entitled millennials. Millennials think that they're more entitled.
Selfish and entitled.
Millennials are entitled.
Or just an entitled millennial.
And when we don't get our way, we complain.
Millennials have been complaining, hey, our voices aren't being heard.
Do you feel really bad for these people?
No, this is the story of my 20s, and I think this is everybody who works in technology is young and stop whining. I mean, I think this is millennial complaining syndrome.
Which is ridiculous because we're lucky to live in the wake of our amazing parents, and we should stop being so ungrateful. We're also very self-absorbed.
Well, at least they're admitting it. A new survey shows a majority of millennials thinks their generation is self-absorbed.
59% said millennials are self-absorbed.
We're way too sensitive and politically correct. Like no one else before us, right? Well, on May 5th, 1925, the Leeds Mercury led with the headline, "Cautious Youth. MP deplores age of safety first." Sir Martin Conway, an MP for English universities, was addressing the Leeds Luncheon Club and said, quote, "When I was a boy, the adventurous youth ran away to sea. No one runs away to sea now." He said that nothing annoyed him more than safety first, and that in the old days, nobody thought about safety. On May 14th, 1982, the Miami News wrote a piece about William Bucky, an author and commentator who was angry that, quote, "Young people today feel entitled to demand a job." September 8th, 1984, the Longview News Journal published an article reading, "Many young people today complain that their parents and ancestors have left them with such problems as the national deficit and a poor environment. But students are actually fortunate. You are inheriting a priceless political and economic system which has worked longer and greater than any other system devised by mankind." June 18th, 1992, the Akron Beacon Journal writes, quote, "Some kids disrespectful of adults. They're more self-absorbed but lacking in self-esteem. Almost 110 years ago, on July 10th, 1910, the Shetland Times wrote a piece on the summer closing ceremony of the Lerwick schools, at which a Sheriff Brown gave a speech saying that, quote, he thought a large number of young people were too sensitive. On April 7th, 1933, the Daily Herald publishes an article titled Sensitive People. It reads, there are many sensitive people in the world, but none are more sensitive than the young. On April 30th, 1993, the Journal Gazette writes, lately I've had this ferocious urge to strangle the next person who uses the phrase politically correct. The frightening thing about these politically correct people is that they come, for the most part, from the hallowed institutions of higher learning. The emergence of the politically correct crowd, oddly enough, closely parallels the drastic decline in literacy in this country. January 6, 1994, the Daily World published an article titled Politically Correct and Nonsense. It reads, each generation has developed their own peculiar sayings. This generation is no different. Let's look at the phrase politically correct. Now that's a phrase we could well do without. And in the 4th century, Aristotle wrote that young people are high-minded because they have not yet been humbled by life, nor have they experienced the force of circumstance. Millennials are also accused of killing a myriad of things, from sports, to alcohol, to conversation, and of course, religion. Yet it seems that every generation has been accused of killing the things that the preceding generation liked. On February 27, 1928, the Capital Times ran with the headline, Religion is losing hold, youth turning away from organized church. On May 29, 1967, the Evening Express led with the headline, Disastrous Decline of Young People in Church. On February 4, 1948, the Nottingham Evening Post led with the headline, Drinking by Young People Declines, reporting that underage drinking in England had all but stopped. On April 2, 1949, the Bath Weekly Chronicle and Herald reported that, quote, we do not have the young people we should like to see. Young lads would no longer give their time and energy to playing the game applied to all kinds of sports. On April 1, 1913, the Evening Telegraph and Post wrote, is the art of conversation declining? In olden times, conversation reached a much higher standard than it does today. To top it all off, here's an excerpt from the Derby Daily Telegraph from November 22, 1929, titled, Things Aren't What They Used to Be, An Age-Old Cry Denied, by Sir James Croft. A very large number of people, mostly either old or middle-aged, seem to be very keen on running down the youth of the present generation. I suppose that ever since the world began, a certain number of the older generation have always said that things are not what they used to be in our day. Young people of today wouldn't dare to do the things they used to do in their day. Not only am I certain that this is not so, but I cannot help feeling that these remarks are unjust. Guys, this is basically my video written almost 90 years ago. What do you guys want me to talk about in my next episode? Please let me know in the comments, and if you'd like to support me on Patreon and get some exclusive content there, it would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to subscribe for new episodes as often as I can make them. Thanks for watching.
Millennials is titled narcissistic, self-interested, unfocused, lazy. We want to make an impact, whatever that means. We want free food and beanbags. They're still not happy. They were told that they were special. Participation medals with lower self-esteem than previous generations. Dopamine. It's highly, highly addictive. The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. They don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. They're turning to a device. If you're sitting at dinner with your friend and you're texting somebody who's not there, that's an addiction, and you put your phone on the table because you are addicted. Add in the sense of impatience. Instant gratification. Binge. Instant gratification. You don't even have to learn. You don't even have to learn. Swipe right. There ain't no app for that. Increase in suicide rates. Increase in accidental deaths due to drug overdoses. More and more kids drop out of school or take leaves of absence due to depression, growing up and going through life and just never really finding joy, deep fulfillment. There should be no cell phones in conference rooms. This is what we all do. We all sit here and wait for the meetings. Relationships are formed this way. We're waiting for a meeting to start and we go, how's your dad? I heard he was in the hospital. Trust doesn't form at an event. And so it's like an alcoholic. And none of us should charge our phones by our beds. Buy an alarm clock. I'm an idealist, but I'm not insane.